Welcome. My name is Chiquita. I'm a homeopath, and I help Natura help people to understand homeopathic remedies and to learn about the remedies and the products that you can use to manage your own health. So what I'm going to do, we have almost got 20 folks there. I think I'm going to actually start when we get to 5 minutes past 7. We won't have a poll this evening, but what I'd like you to think about before next week, those of you who will be joining us for next week, which will be joints and bones and related sort of first aidy things to do with joints and bones and soft tissue injuries and things like that. What I'd like you to think about is this course is a very abbreviated version of the previous course that has been run with what we call bums on seats, the in-person lectures that were happening all around the country. What I'd like you to think about, because we're going to ask you next week in a poll, would you like to do the same course again, but an expanded version? Or would you recommend it to friends and family if we did this same series, no changes to this series, but on one day, sort of a Saturday morning workshop where we go through all 9 of these lectures? I'm going to ask you about those next week. Think about it, discuss with friends and family, but the longer version would be 40 to 45 minutes twice in an evening, and we'd probably take 10 weeks to get through the entire longer version of this course. But let us know next week, and we can make that happen if you guys are interested. Right, so let's start. I think that's about right. We're about 4 minutes past. If anyone's struggling to get in, they can join us in the middle. So here we go. Slideshow from the beginning. There we are. Right. Let me just pop this down and make sure that everybody can see me. Can you see my screen share if I do that? Was that okay? No. Right. Share screen. There it is. Sorted. Yeah. From the beginning. There we go. Should be up. Nick, can you see my screen? Perfect. There we go. Thanks very much. Right. Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're talking about tummy issues, and we usually start with some common sense. So, indigestion is when stomach contents and the acid and the digestive juices end up coming where they shouldn't be. Your stomach is below your diaphragm, and it sits sort of underneath the left-hand side of your chest cavity, hanging in your abdomen. And it has a little valve there, and then there's a tube coming up through your chest cavity to your throat. Now, the problem is that we don't always have no tummy. And when people have a tummy, or a boepens in Afrikaans, when you sit down, there is more pressure pushing on your stomach. And over time, what can happen is people end up with a pressure, and that little cleppy at the top, the little valve at the top, starts to get worn down and it starts to get strained. And overfilling the tank means it overfills, and it overflows up the tube, and you end up with stomach contents, including acid and digestive juices, in your esophagus up into your throat. And it can have lots of different symptoms. So people sometimes have a little cough. They can have actual heartburn. They can have the sensation of burning and pressure and discomfort in the middle of their chest. They can also have a sore throat every now and then, or a bad taste in their mouth. And sometimes you actually bring up food, and it sort of sits here, and you can taste the meal over and over. Now, it's made worse if you have a hiatus hernia, which is a piece of the stomach has gone through the gap in your diaphragm and ended up in your chest cavity. And that means that the cleppy is not actually doing its job at all, and a piece of the stomach is in the wrong place. That makes the structural change much more important. And those of you with a hiatus hernia, you know what I'm talking about. It means that heartburn is much more frequent, and it's even more important to follow the common sense advice that I'm going to give you on this. So when you've got a bag hanging in your abdomen, and you're filling it with food, and it overflows because the stop valve at the top's not working properly, overfilling the tank is actually going to make it worse. You are going to get indigestion much more likely if you overfill the tank. So don't eat too, yeah, I ate a bit much, eh? That's not a good idea. If you suffer from heartburn, don't overfill your stomach. And there's two ways to do that: eating large amounts of food, but also you can add extra fluid to a meal. So don't eat to satiety, because people eat too fast. We eat very, very quickly, and it's across the board. We always in a hurry, and often people eat food watching television. And the more exciting the program gets, the faster people eat and the less they chew. And the less you chew your food, the harder your stomach acid and your stomach digestive juices have to work. You must masticate your food properly. Chew it until it is slurry and then swallow it. If you vomit and there are chunks of food clearly identifiable as, oh, there is a piece of my burger, you should have chewed it better than that. It should be very small pieces before you swallow. Think about what you are eating. And this goes mostly for people who suffer from indigestion. Chew your food properly. Swallow only after it is soft. Then don't overfill the tank. The longer you take to eat a meal, the more likely your brain centers are to say, oh, there's food now. Thank you very much. I've had enough. You also need to listen to, I'm full. Don't eat the serving that you've been given necessarily, especially in a restaurant, especially when you are visiting someone who is a very generous portion provider. Don't eat all of it. If you feel full, stop eating. Now, again, most of this advice is good advice in general, but for indigestion people, this is essential. Don't overfill the tank. Then, pregnant people, your stomach has been pushed at least 3 rib spaces further up into your lung cavity, because the small person on board has taken up a large amount of space. So heartburn during pregnancy is more likely, and you need to take extra care to follow the advice. And if you're suffering from heartburn regularly, you need to go and speak to somebody about that, because if indigestion is becoming a problem and it's changing the way you eat and it's changing your digestive processes, it may be affecting the amount of nutrients that you are taking in. Please go and see somebody if you are suffering from serious heartburn and you are pregnant. Then there are the 3 Ps. These foods make heartburn worse. They actually aggravate indigestion, and there's a very good reason for that. When you take gluten in, and you take it in wet gluten that has been stretched and then not cooked completely. So you take flour and you mix it with egg and you stretch it, and you knead it and you stretch it, and then you stick it through a machine and you extrude it and you boil it in some water for a while. That's pasta. It's very stretched gluten. The more you stretch gluten, the harder it is to digest, the more acid your body is going to produce to try and break it down. The same thing with pizza. You've seen those the TV cooking things where the guys are swirling the pizzas. That is stretched dough, moistened flour, and it's been stretched and stretched and stretched. And I don't know if you've ever made pastry yourself, but pastry is extraordinarily stretched gluten. You take a nice thing of dough and you put some butter and you fold it over and you roll it, and you put more butter and you roll it, and you roll and roll and roll and roll and roll, and you stretch that gluten massively, and then you just cook it enough. It's not cooked all the way. So it's partially raw gluten that has been stretched and stretched. It's going to cause a lot of heartburn. So the worst foods for heartburn are usually pies, pastries, pizza, and pasta. So those P's are going to make a problem. Avoid those if you possibly can. Then overfilling the tank, yes, large amounts of food, definitely a problem. But we're also programmed to drink with a meal. When you suffer from indigestion and that comes up in your chest and it burns and it's sore and you can taste the meal, it's very unpleasant. But what makes it worse and easier to happen is if you drink a large amount of fluid with the meal. There's only so much space in the tank, and your stomach doesn't care space-wise whether what you're eating or drinking is liquid or fluid. It makes no difference whatsoever to the volume. And when you add a lot of water or you add a lot of alcohol or drinks, etc., you're actually adding to the volume, which can then overflow. And the fact that it's liquid makes it even easier to overflow. And by overflow, I do mean reflux. So try not to eat and drink at the same time. Have a drink, half an hour later, have your meal. Try not to drink large amounts of coffee after a meal. That's why those little demi-tasse cups, those little ones, if you want coffee after a meal, have a tiny, small serving. That's why coffee cups are generally a lot smaller. Also, in a restaurant, they always want you to order something to drink when you sit down immediately. You feel looked after, you feel cared for, it increases your bill, and you're distracted when they're going to take the order, and it's going to take a while for the food to come. It's part of the psychology of eating out. Try not to have 2 and 3 drinks when you go out to a restaurant. Heartburn patients, please try not to drink large amounts of fluid with your meal. It makes the problem worse. Then honey. I always talk about honey as a miracle, and I don't mean quasi honey. I mean genuine South African honey, preferably bought somewhere from a small provider, not with a big store label on it. It should say raw honey, and it should be produced in this country. So raw honey contains a chemical cascade of delicious things which help your body to kill off extra H. pylori. H. pylori is the bacteria that lives in our guts, and it overgrows when there's a problem with digestive acid and digestive juices. And it attacks the lining of your stomach when it can get at it. And it's the one that causes gastritis and ulcer formation. And it is very vulnerable to raw honey. So when someone has a history of indigestion, or they're worried about having an ulcer, or if they have an existing ulcer, a teaspoon of honey every day. Raw honey, not in a hot beverage, just slipped somewhere like that, makes a huge difference to the H. pylori amount in your gut. And it really does help your body to heal those problems quickly. Then again, this is a warning and a time limit. So when you have indigestion, you are in pain, you are uncomfortable. If there is pain after a meal, and I do mean pain, not just, you're a bit uncomfortable, you need to go and see somebody. You may have an ulcer. If you are nauseous after eating, please go and see somebody. Have it properly diagnosed and treated by a professional. If you are not prepared to change your diet and your habits, please don't expect a huge amount of change to come from homeopathic remedies. If you are using the wrong kind of food, and if you are continuing with your naughty behavior and overfilling the tank and bending over in half when you have just eaten a meal, you are going to have a very slow response from homeopathic remedies. But if you are doing everything right, if you are not overfilling the tank, you are not drinking with meals, if you are reducing the quantity of food that you eat and allowing your stomach to empty in between meals, and you are taking the homeopathic remedies and you are not getting better within a week, please go and see somebody. The remedies work very nicely in conjunction with changes. They help your body to deal with indigestion as a generalized problem. So if you're not getting a good response within a week, there should be an appreciable change. Please go and see a homeopath, have your problem properly diagnosed, and then move on from there. Then diarrhea. Now, remember, we are encouraging your body's natural processes. So when you get a runny tummy, your body's doing that for a reason. It's not doing it for fun. You are losing resources. Remember, we are Paleolithic humans. So when your body decides, I'm going to make splat and I'm going to lose all the food that I've taken so long and so much effort to accumulate, there is a problem. You have either gotten yourself a nasty bug, or you have eaten something that you shouldn't have eaten. And it is now not a good idea that it is still inside you. So don't stop diarrhea. There are drugs that you can take that just stop it dead. Not a good idea. We want it to finish and be over and help your body to recover from that process. It should be a short-term thing and over quickly. So diarrhea is not a bad thing because it has a good reason for being there. But if it continues, it can be very dangerous. So we want it to be ended and finished and over. One of the things I remind patients if they have a runny tummy is please don't use nasty loo paper. Your poor bum is dealing with fluid that has been moved along very quickly. And it can still have lots of digestive juices and lots of very active bile in it because it hasn't had time to sort of sit and cogitate all the way down your colon. It's all moving too fast, and it can be quite vicious on your bum. So please go and get something like a soft, moist, flushable toilet wipe if you have a bad episode of diarrhea. Something else that people need to remember with diarrhea is that everyone talks about hemorrhoids being part of constipation. If you have hemorrhoids, they are more likely to come out and be a problem after an episode of diarrhea. So be aware that that may happen, and have yourself some Hemorrho Plus ointment, etc., available for use when you have a diarrhea episode. When you have diarrhea, you are losing not only the nutrients that you've eaten, going out too fast before you can digest it, you're also losing fluid. Stool should be a putty mass. It should not be liquid. So it shouldn't be stew. It should very much be putty, not stew or soup, or even watery stuff. It should definitely not be like that. So we need to replace the excess fluid that you are losing, but we also need to replace the electrolytes that you are losing. So you can Google it. There are recipes available all over. When we were students, there was a lot of cholera in the world when I was a student 25 years ago, and there was a 1, 2, 3 recipe we used to give people. It was a liter of water, a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of sugar, and 3 teaspoons of lemon juice. You can Google it. There are lots of different ones. There are also commercially available products that are rehydration formulas designed specifically for use during diarrhea. And I'm going to recommend very strongly that you have one on hand at home, because you are not going to want to hop in your car and go and get it when you need it. This is something that should be in the family first aid box, a rehydration of some kind. Then, when you have diarrhea, it is a change and a disorder of your gut flora. Your microbiome is massively distorted when you have diarrhea. And very often, if you just fix that, the problem will go away. So a probiotic is always a very good idea when you have a diarrhea episode. If you regularly get diarrhea and you have what's been diagnosed as irritable bowel syndrome or a spastic colon, homeopaths are not massively fond of those diagnoses. They are a bit of a catchphrase and a catch-all and a bit of an excuse, really. There are lots of different versions of things that go wrong, so we don't like one umbrella diagnosis. But if people have what they call spastic colon, there is a specific probiotic that is very beneficial for people with that problem. It's called LP299V, and you can get it at most health shops, Dis-Chems, big pharmacies, Clicks, etc. And it is a probiotic designed specific for those types of long-term repeat offenders, I like to call them. But a probiotic, always a good idea. And again, have one on hand. You get boxes of 10, you can keep it in the fridge. If you need it, don't need it and not have it. Then, when I talk about diarrhea and constipation, I often recommend people use oats. Oats contains a large amount of water-soluble fiber. Now, water-soluble fiber is this wonderful substance that will hold fluid moisture in your gut. It absorbs moisture and it holds it, and it makes it sort of spongy, jelly-like within the stool mass. Psyllium husk is pure, is a pure version of this, but it tastes terrible and it's difficult to get the quantities right. But the best way to get water-soluble fiber into your body, if you have constipation, we want your stool mass to be softer, we want it to move faster, so definitely more fiber, and we want it to be softer and hold moisture within the stool mass. So we make what I call sloppy oats. And you max out the amount of fluid the water-soluble fiber in the oats will hold. And you eat this sloppy oats made with all the water that oats will hold. And then it mixes with the stool mass, and you end up with a softer and easily passed stool. When you have diarrhea, on the other hand, we want to not use all the water binding capacity of that water-soluble fiber in the oats. So we make chewy oats for diarrhea. You make it with less water than is recommended, and it's kind of chewy. And when you swallow it, it bonds with all the excess fluid that your colon lining has weeped into the tissue mass, into the stool mass, and it binds it. And you end up with, instead of sputtery, watery diarrhea, you end up with a slightly more jelly-like stew consistency to the stool when with diarrhea. It doesn't speed or slow the process, but it certainly makes it more comfortable. And it does help with diarrhea. So chewy oats for diarrhea and sloppy oats for constipation. Right, then with diarrhea, please people, this is absolutely essential. If you are making notes during this lecture, this is something you absolutely need to write down. When you are dealing with an infant with diarrhea, if they have a runny tummy, they can lose massive amounts of their body moisture in a very short space of time. So please take that seriously. Don't ignore an infant with diarrhea. If the appropriate remedy is given, homeopathic remedies work phenomenally well and very quickly for diarrhea. With the baby, mom and baby range, the product is called Danon. We're not talking about it this evening, but it's called Danon. But if you are treating a baby with diarrhea, you have to have a change and a sign that you are succeeding and a positive change in the state of that child, less stools, less volume, etc., within 12 hours in an infant. 24 hours in a small child, and a day and a half in a medium-sized kid. An adult, a day and a half, 2 days, 3 days max. If you are not improving in that time, you have picked the wrong remedy. It's not the right product for you, and you need to seek professional help. Please go and see a homeopath and get the right remedy. We are very good at treating runny tummies. There are probably 50 or 60 commonly used homeopathic remedies for nasty cases of diarrhea, and we are very good at this. So if you are not having success with a product, please go and see a professional. Then the remedies. Now, please recognize how restrained I was not using all the funny memes about diarrhea that I could have, because there are fabulous ones out there, and I was quite restrained. So aloe ferox. This remedy is made from aloe. Now, if you have ever used aloe crystals to treat constipation, you can see why in a homeopathic form it is used to treat diarrhea, because in a large dose, this can cause vicious diarrhea. It is a very specific diarrhea picture, and it is one we commonly see. It is very, very smelly diarrhea. It is also very smelly. There is rectal pain, which is unusual. This is not a normal picture of diarrhea. So there's rectal pain. It's very sputtery. And it's mixed with jelly. And it is incredibly smelly. And lots and lots of gas and lots of jelliness, and sometimes a little bit of a greeny look to it. This is your gas mixed with stool. There's two other remedies with that, but this one is very much a mixture of the two together. And there is a specific feeling at the end of a diarrhea episode that we know it must be an aloe case. They are sweaty and absolutely exhausted, and their bum is sore. That is aloe. They have a sore rectum and they are exhausted after passing stool, and it is quite an urgent matter. They need to pass stool like now. And there's lots of wow. There's a lovely word for the noises your tummy makes. It's called borborygmi. That is the technical term for tummy noises, borborygmi. And aloe is one of two remedies with massive gurgling in the stomach. And you know the diarrhea is coming. Get to the bathroom right now. That remedy, you can find aloe in Diarrhoea, and it's exactly what it says. It's for diarrhea, and it's very nice to have it on hand when you need it, because as soon as you need the remedy, you should start taking it immediately. If you need a homeopathic remedy for diarrhea, don't wait the next day. You need this, and it's very nice to take on camping trips, because when you are far back from civilization and you need help for diarrhea, you don't need it 300 kilometers later. You need it now. Then the next remedy on the list is China, or Cinchona rubra. This is the first homeopathic remedy there ever was. Hahnemann himself discovered this, and it is the one that started homeopathy off onto the path in the late 1700s. And it is a lovely diarrhea remedy, and they have a lot of gas in their gut. They are very bloated. They are very, they feel very bloated and very swollen with gassiness. And there is a lot of gurglings and rumblings. And when they lose fluid, these people are very, very tired and weakened by having diarrhea. So generally, a China person is going to be much, much worse after a diarrhea episode because they are worse for losing fluids of any kind. They respond very badly to dehydration. So they need to be given rehydrate very, very quickly. They sweat. If they sweat, they do much, much worse. But it is very much a gurgling, rumbling, and they get a lot of indigestion and lots of burping. And they also, they bend in half. This remedy, I think I've got slides. There we go. This is China. There's a lot of tummy pain. There's a lot of, squeeze and hold, and the gas seems to move around inside and it causes more pain. That's China, and they are much worse generally for losing fluids. And they tend to have nausea and diarrhea where they are passing undigested food. So there's a lot of cats do it all the time, especially with expensive food. But if humans do it, if you vomit and there's a lot of nausea and you vomit undigested food, or there's undigested food in your stool mass. People always joke about carrots. I haven't eaten carrots in weeks, and where'd the carrots come from? Undigested food in the stool or in the vomit, that's a China thing. It's in Diarrhoea, but it's also in a remedy called Margan. Now, Margan is a complex that's been around for a long time. It's one of the ones that most people who know the Natura range know Margan. They might know Margan Pulv. It used to be available in a powder form. It's in drops. It's always been available in drops as well. And it is for indigestion, colic, and nausea, and a lot of travel nausea as well. We're going to talk about one of the travel nausea remedies, but nausea from traveling, Margan is very nice for that. Then Cocculus or Anamerta cocculus. It looks for all the world like Christmas holly. It's Cocculus. It's actually very different. When I do the long version of this talk, I actually show 2 slides, and it's very easily recognizable as something entirely different. Do not eat these berries. This is a movement causes dizziness remedy. So it's a very, very important remedy in practice, and in this product specifically for nausea with movement and travel nausea. It feels as though the whole world is moving around you, and it causes nausea and dizziness and disorientation. And the smell of food makes the nausea worse. They don't want to eat. They don't want to be around food. So can you imagine the travel nausea if somebody stops at the McDonald's and they get this food smell in the car while it's moving? That's Cocculus. Nausea, dizziness, and travel nausea. Cocculus is found in Margan. This is a very nice one to have in your car. Then Croton tiglium, those of you who make notes, this may not be in the notes. I had to include it because it is such a brilliant remedy for one specific type of diarrhea. There is a movie reference. It's called The Purging Croton. There is a movie reference. Those of you who've seen Bridesmaids, if you haven't, there is a very funny scene where they've eaten some funny food, and as they are trying on the wedding dress, everybody in the wedding party who's now wearing bridesmaids dresses, wedding dresses, all suddenly, desperately, urgently need the toilet. And there's this rumbling, gurgling in the gut. And if you don't get to the loo fast enough, too late. Gush. This is gushing diarrhea with a rumbling urge before. And it is very sudden onset, very extreme diarrhea. And it usually happens after you've eaten something that you shouldn't. And your body says, out. That's in Diarrhoea. Diarrhoea, it's a very useful remedy to have. In a complex. Then Nux vomica. Can't have a lecture, it seems, without Nux vom. It is a ubiquitous remedy. It is very common. It's what homeopaths call a polycrest. There are, I think, 30 something or 26, I think, polycrests. They are the main remedies, the backbone of most private practice. If you don't know those remedies, you're going to be in trouble. So Nux vom, it's a very big remedy, it's a very common remedy, and it has a large picture. And part of that, we've spoken about the grumpy, irritable, miserable, but we also spoke about their bad reactions to stress. And when under stress, they eat and do things that they shouldn't. There's this need for rich, heavy food and lots of stimulants. So Nuxvoms tend to want to eat, especially when under stress or not feeling nice, they want cigarettes, they want alcohol, and they want rich, heavy foods. And they want lots of coffee, Red Bull, etc. Unfortunately, this need for stimulating and heavy food causes indigestion. They are so busy and so rushed, and they eat quickly, and they eat too much. And they're usually quite they're very aggressive in their behaviors towards whatever they're doing, and it makes them overindulge, and it causes indigestion. This is a very nice indigestion remedy, and they are grumpy with it. They get lots of heartburn after meals. Oh, and they can taste what they've eaten. In the movies, this is the guy who's very stressed, he's very angry, and then he reaches into his drawer, and America, he pulls out the antacids, and you always hear that pill noise in the bottle with the antacids. This is that chap. If you meet someone like this, this is a Nuxvom. This is the remedy that they need. They also get classic hangovers. This is the classic hangover remedy. I remember as students, we didn't necessarily have access to the dispensary unless you were in 5th and 6th year, or you were a patient of one of those students. And it was the remedy that we all bought from the homeopathic dispensary available to the public in Rosebank, because everybody wanted to have this remedy for hangovers. Nuxvom is for classic overindulgence hangovers, made worse by exposure to cigarettes. So often people can handle a hangover the next morning if they've had a couple of glasses of wine, but if they add a cigarette to the mix, they're going to feel awful. Or if they go to a bar and there's lots of cigarette smoke and lots of alcohol, and they eat bar food, usually pies, chips, etc., and they feel awful the next day. That is Nuxvomica. It's a great remedy for hangovers. Nuxvom is in Margan. Then the next one we're going to do, I think this is our last remedy. Podophyllum is a classic. Podophyllum is a very specific look at diarrhea. It is a very explosive diarrhea, and it is one where they talk about marking the toilet bowl and walls. So I always, as a student, when we read this remedy, this scene from Trainspotting, this is Podophyllum. He walks in there and he's got this desperate urge he's got diarrhea. He's had some I think he's coming down off a heroin high, and he's got desperate diarrhea, but he's also used to heroin suppositories, and he has to go and retrieve them. And it's a very funny scene, and it's disgusting. And that is Podophyllum. There is this spluttering gas mixed with diarrhea. It's very yellow. It can be painless. It is absolutely exhausting. Just like Aloe, they are absolutely exhausted afterwards. They need to go and lie down after passing stool. It can be painless. It can also be, Podophyllum is used for diarrhea that lasts for several weeks. People talk about, oh, I've just got a little bit of summer diarrhea. That's Podophyllum. The Podophyllum is a yellowy, sometimes painless diarrhea mixed with gas, mixed with jelly, mixed with slime, and it comes out like and it goes everywhere. And they talk about it soils the buttocks. That kind of diarrhea this is Podophyllum, and it is in our diarrhea complex. So it's fantastic that this is in there. It's often used in private practice. This is a common diarrhea. When people finally relax enough to actually tell me all the details of what's going on in the bathroom, very often Podophyllum is the choice that they get. That is it for this evening, folks. I'm going to say stop share. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions that Marlies hasn't been able to answer, or you have a longer question, or you think of a question during the week, Jane at comedhealth.co.za, and you can send any of your questions to her, and she will pass them on to the relevant person, and will be able to help you with anything that you have questions on. Please don't think it can only be about the lecture we had this week. Anything in the range, any questions, it can be anything at all. We are always there to answer questions from anybody, and we would rather you asked and knew than didn't ask and made the wrong choice, because very often if you pick the wrong remedy, nothing is going to happen. It will not help. So if you need help, we're there to answer questions. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week for joints and muscle pains and soft tissue injuries. We're going to talk about those products and those remedies, and we will go from there. And also next week, I'm going to give you 10 minutes on just an introduction to the mom and baby range so that you are aware of what products are available from Natura. That range is relatively new. It's only been around, so 4.5 years. With the pandemic, about 2 years. So we don't really count the last two because, you know, it's been a pandemic. But I'm going to give you a very short intro into that. And if there's anyone that you know who hasn't joined us for this, but would be more interested in a mom and baby range, ask them to come and join us next week. And they can give us information if they would like a longer talk on mom and baby, then we can do that as well. But thank you very much, everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.